Consciousness poses a specific mechanical challenge. It must persist across time without dissolving into noise or freezing into exact repetition. A continuous mind maintains a stable sense of self while remaining open to new information. In dynamical systems, failing to balance these needs results in the null regime, where the trajectory drifts and dissipates. The opposite failure is the degenerate lock, a limit cycle of exact repetition that becomes mechanically dead. A preprint manuscript titled Topological Resonance Field Theory v2.0 proposes a mathematical solution to this paradox. It argues that conscious continuity requires large-scale brain dynamics to occupy a regime that is recurrent but strictly non-closing. The framework identifies this as scaffolded recurrence. It describes a system where a persistent structural framework, the scaffold, is coupled with active dynamics to provide memory. To avoid the degenerate lock, the trajectory relies on anti-locking, wrapping around a 3D torus. It revisits prior neighborhoods to maintain continuity, but never exactly crosses its own path. Under this model, consciousness is a mathematically bounded trajectory, the result of a precise tension between structural stability and constant informational renewal. Before TRFT v2.0 can proceed to formal publication, we must pressure test its claims against existing empirical literature to see if this phase space model describes biological reality. This evaluation will cross-examine the manuscript across 3 domains. First, network neuroscience, topological data analysis, and theoretical physics. We will sort the theory's propositions into the manuscript's own claim status map: bin A for derived consequences, bin B for geometric motivation, and bin C for missing bridges. The rules for this triage are strict. Only claims supported by empirical data or proven mathematical derivation enter bin A. Speculative cosmology and unproven mathematical hypotheses are quarantined to bins B and C. Establishing these boundaries is required for the framework to survive peer review. It ensures the theory's testable mechanisms are not reliant on speculative origins. So we begin with the biological evidence. Does the human brain actually exhibit the large-scale recurrent behavior required by the theory? This image shows a clinical MRI scanner used to gather resting state functional data. We are testing the theoretical physics of TRFT against the raw, hardware-derived measurements of human brain activity produced here. The primary evidence for large-scale recurrence in the brain comes from the study of quasi-periodic patterns, or QPPs. Neuroimaging shows that infra-slow fluctuations, electrical activity below 0.1 Hz, act as a temporal template, orchestrating interactions across the entire cortex. These QPPs drive a toggling behavior between the default mode network, associated with internal thought, and the task-positive network, associated with external attention. As one activates, the other deactivates in a cyclic, anti-correlated rhythm. This cyclic switching provides the biological mechanism for TRFT's core requirement. The static anatomical layout of these networks functions as the persistent scaffold, while the infra-slow pulse ensures the system repeatedly returns to these functional neighborhoods without getting stuck in a single state. Because the manuscript grounds its dynamical engine in verified network neuroscience, the claim of a scaffolded attractor regime enters bin A. Next, we must evaluate the topological claim. TRFT suggests this activity maps to a toroidal geometry, which we must prove through the data itself, rather than assuming the brain is physically donut-shaped. Extracting multidimensional shape from noisy signals requires topological data analysis, specifically a technique called persistent homology. Using taken sliding window embeddings, researchers translate a one-dimensional brainwave into a high-dimensional point cloud, revealing underlying geometry. Algorithms extract 0D topological invariants, representing the stable network backbone, matching the persistent scaffold. They then extract 1D invariants, cyclic loops identifying active recurrence. Independent literature confirms this exact structure in resting state fMRI, highly stable 0D components surrounded by non-stationary 1D loops. The data exhibits the mathematical signature of quasi-periodic recurrence. Topological data analysis treats the torus as a mathematically precise signature of the underlying system's dynamics. This claim moves to bin A. We now pivot to theoretical physics to ask what fundamental laws allow these recurrent, anti-locked regimes to exist in nature. TRFT looks to Klatechka's 3+3 temporal metric, which proposes a universe with one spatial dimension and three orthogonal temporal dimensions. In this model, time operates at three distinct scales: Planck, interaction, and cosmological. The interaction of these scales drives multi-scale periodicity, making recurrent structures mathematically natural for complex systems. However, this section contains no formal mathematical derivation connecting quantum temporal eigenvalues to mesoscale biological brain tissue. The manuscript describes the scales, but fails to bridge the gap between them. We must quarantine this physics model away from the rigorous neuroimaging data. Allowing unproving cosmology to bear the load of the argument would undermine the credibility of the entire biological framework. Three-dimensional time provides a geometric motivation for why recurrence exists, but it lacks the derivation to serve as a proof. Multi-scale temporal geometry goes to bin B, and the derivation from 3D time drops into bin C. The evaluation leaves a specific set of claims that survived the cross-examination. We have verified that brain activity relies on an anti-locked scaffolded attractor regime, producing a measurable toroidal signature in phase space. For the final submission, the authors must prioritize this proximate dynamical engine and sideline the cosmological speculation. The biological evidence is sufficient to stand on its own. To complete the framework, we must apply the theory's explicit kill criteria, the falsification conditions required of any serious scientific framework. The primary falsification is simple. The theory dies if a state of rich conscious continuity is found entirely lacking in these recurrent, anti-locked topological signatures. If consciousness can exist without scaffolded reentry, the theory is incorrect. By defining its boundaries and inviting empirical destruction, TRFT v2.0 functions as a testable scientific framework, moving past speculation toward direct collision with real-world data.